The Haunted Doll. The old Victorian mansion stood at the end of Willow Street, its dark silhouette casting an eerie presence over the neighborhood. Its imposing structure, with ivy-clad walls and moss-covered shingles, had long been the subject of unsettling rumors. The children whispered tales of ghosts and malevolent spirits, but none had dared to venture close after nightfall. In one of the mansion's dimly lit rooms, a little boy named Tommy lived with his parents. Tommy was a quiet, introverted child, but he had one prized possession that brought a glimmer of joy into his otherwise solitary world: a doll named Clara. Clara was no ordinary doll. With her porcelain skin, rosy cheeks, and golden curls, she was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, a relic from a bygone era. Tommy had discovered Clara hidden in the attic, tucked away in an old trunk beneath dusty, forgotten relics. It was as though the doll had been waiting for him, her eyes gleaming with an eerie life of their own. From the moment Tommy laid eyes on her, he felt an inexplicable connection, one that transcended the boundaries of ordinary playthings. At night, when the moon hung heavy in the sky and shadows danced across the walls, Clara would come to life. Tommy could hear her whispering in hushed tones, her porcelain lips moving silently. He knew she was special, but he had no idea of the sinister secrets that lay dormant within her. One chilly evening, as Tommy's parents sat downstairs in the parlor, the boy was in his room with Clara. The wind howled outside, and the mansion creaked and groaned as if it held its own terrible secrets. Tommy and Clara were nestled together on his bed, the flickering candlelight casting eerie, elongated shadows across the room. "Tell me a story, Clara," Tommy whispered, his voice trembling slightly. The doll's eyes seemed to gleam with a faint inner light as she began to speak, her voice a haunting melody. She told a tale of a family that had once lived in the mansion, a family that had been torn apart by madness and despair. The father, a cruel and tyrannical man, had locked his wife and children in the very room where Tommy now lay. They had suffered in silence, imprisoned by the dark secrets of the mansion. As Clara spun her story, Tommy felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't tear his gaze away from her, even as her words grew darker and more sinister. She spoke of a malevolent presence that still lingered within the mansion, a vengeful spirit that hungered for the souls of the living. The room seemed to grow colder, and Tommy shivered, clutching Clara tightly. "Is it still here?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Clara's porcelain face twisted into a grotesque smile, her eyes narrowing with malice. "Yes, Tommy," she whispered. "It's always here, waiting, watching." Terrified, Tommy tried to pull away from the doll, but her porcelain fingers gripped him with an unnatural strength. He screamed for his parents, but his cries were swallowed by the darkness of the mansion. Downstairs, his parents were oblivious to their son's terror. They laughed and chatted, the sound of their voices drowned out by the howling wind. But then, a bone-chilling scream pierced the silence, causing them to jump to their feet. They raced upstairs to find the source of the cry, their hearts pounding with dread. In Tommy's room, they found him lying on the floor, his face contorted in terror. Clara lay beside him, her eyes once again lifeless and cold. Tommy's parents scooped him up, their worry and fear etched on their faces. They tried to console their son, but he could only mutter one word over and over: haunted. As the days passed, Tommy's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He refused to sleep in his room, instead choosing to spend his nights huddled in the parlor with his parents. He no longer played with Clara, and the doll sat forgotten in the corner of his room. But the mansion had other plans. It hungered for the presence of the living, and it would not be denied. Night after night, Tommy would wake up to find himself drawn back to his room, unable to resist the pull of the malevolent force that resided within the mansion's walls. As the weeks turned into months, Tommy's once vibrant spirit withered away. He became a shell of his former self, his eyes haunted by the horrors he had witnessed. His parents watched in helpless despair as their beloved son slipped further and further into darkness. One fateful night, as a thunderstorm raged outside, Tommy's parents heard a sound they had dreaded for months, the sound of their son's voice, cold and hollow, whispering in the darkness. "Clara," he murmured, his voice filled with longing. "I'm coming back." Terrified, his parents rushed to his room, but it was too late. Tommy was gone, his body never to be found. The only trace of him was a single porcelain doll, sitting on his bed, her eyes gleaming with an eerie light. The mansion on Willow Street had claimed another victim, and Clara, the haunted doll, remained as its malevolent guardian, waiting for the next soul to be drawn into its dark and sinister web. Years passed since the mysterious disappearance of Tommy, and the old Victorian mansion on Willow Street stood as a grim reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. The whispers of its malevolent presence had grown stronger, and the once vibrant neighborhood had become a place shrouded in fear. The legend of Clara, the haunted doll, had spread far and wide, becoming a chilling tale passed down from one generation to the next. Parents warned their children never to venture near the mansion, especially after nightfall. But curiosity, as it often does, got the better of some. A group of teenagers, emboldened by their youthful bravado, decided to investigate the mansion one fateful evening. Armed with flashlights and their smartphones, they crept through the overgrown garden and up to the mansion's imposing front door. The wind whispered through the trees, and the night was alive with eerie sounds. As they entered the mansion, the air grew colder, and the atmosphere weighed heavy on their souls. They ventured deeper into the darkened hallways, their flashlights casting feeble beams of light into the oppressive darkness. It wasn't long before they stumbled upon Tommy's abandoned room, where Clara still sat on the bed, her porcelain face frozen in a grotesque grin. The teenagers exchanged nervous glances but couldn't resist the urge to investigate the notorious doll. One of them, a girl named Emily, reached out to touch it. The moment her fingers made contact with Clara, an otherworldly chill swept through the room. The doll's eyes flickered to life, and a haunting voice filled the air. "Welcome," Clara whispered, her voice a mournful melody. "You've come to play." Panic seized the teenagers, and they tried to flee, but the mansion seemed to have a will of its own. The doors slammed shut, trapping them inside. Their phones no longer worked, their flashlights dimmed, and the darkness closed in around them. One by one, they were drawn deeper into the mansion's sinister embrace, each becoming a victim of the malevolent force that lurked within. Their terrified screams echoed through the halls, mingling with the agonized cries of those who had suffered before them. Outside the mansion, the neighborhood had long been abandoned by the living. The mansion stood as a malevolent sentinel, its windows shrouded in darkness, and its walls tainted by the horrors of the past. No one dared to approach it, and those who had once lived nearby had fled, leaving behind only memories of the haunted mansion on Willow Street. In the heart of the mansion, Clara sat once again on Tommy's bed, her porcelain eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. She had claimed new souls, adding them to the legion of lost spirits that now haunted the mansion. The malevolent presence that had bound them all together grew stronger with each passing day, feeding on the fear and despair of those trapped within its walls. The mansion had become a vortex of darkness, a place where time stood still, and the living were forever ensnared by the sins of the past. The legend of Clara, the haunted doll, would continue to haunt the nightmares of those who dared to venture near, a grim warning of the horrors that lurked within the mansion on Willow Street. And so, the mansion waited, its insatiable hunger for the living never satisfied, its secrets buried deep within its haunted halls, and its malevolent presence enduring through the ages, a testament to the darkness that could be found in the most unsuspecting places. Decades had passed, and the once notorious mansion on Willow Street had become a chilling legend, whispered about in hushed tones by those who dared to speak its name. The mansion had earned a reputation as a place of unspeakable horrors, a cursed relic from a dark and forgotten past. Yet, it still stood, a forbidding monument to the malevolent force that dwelled within. In the small town that had once thrived around the mansion, a group of paranormal investigators had decided to uncover the truth behind the tales of Clara, the haunted doll, and the mansion's sinister history. Armed with an array of high-tech equipment and a determination to unravel the mysteries that had plagued the town for generations, they arrived one crisp autumn evening. Their leader, Dr. Sarah Monroe, was a renowned expert in paranormal research, known for her fearless pursuit of the supernatural. She had gathered a team of experts, each with their own unique skills, to aid in the investigation. As they entered the mansion, they could feel the weight of its dark history pressing down on them. The air was thick with an otherworldly presence, and the temperature dropped sharply. Dr. Monroe led the way, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. They ventured into the dimly lit hallways, their equipment buzzing with activity. The mansion seemed to come alive around them, with eerie whispers echoing from the shadows. The team pushed forward, determined to uncover the truth. In Tommy's room, they found Clara, the haunted doll, still sitting on the bed, her eyes as cold and lifeless as ever. Dr. Monroe approached cautiously, her fingers trembling as she reached out to touch the doll. The moment her hand made contact, Clara's eyes flickered to life, and a haunting voice filled the room. "Who dares to disturb me?" Clara whispered, her voice a chilling melody. "We're here to uncover the truth," Dr. Monroe replied, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her. Clara's porcelain face twisted into a grotesque smile, and she began to recount the horrors of the mansion's past. She told of the family that had once lived there, of the darkness that had consumed them, and of the malevolent presence that had taken root within the mansion's walls. As Clara spoke, the room seemed to come alive with spectral energy. Shadows danced on the walls, and the temperature dropped even further. The investigators watched in awe and terror as the room transformed before their eyes. Suddenly, the walls of the room seemed to dissolve, revealing a scene from the past. The family that had lived in the mansion appeared before them, their faces contorted in agony. They were trapped in a never-ending nightmare, reliving their torment for all eternity. The investigators were overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the paranormal activity. They could feel the malevolent force of the mansion closing in around them, threatening to consume their very souls. Desperate to break the connection between Clara and the mansion, Dr. Monroe made a bold move. She reached out and grabbed the doll, wrenching it from the bed. Clara's eyes blazed with fury, and the room shook with an unearthly power. But Dr. Monroe was unyielding. With a swift and determined motion, she smashed the doll against the floor, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. As Clara's porcelain form shattered, a deafening scream filled the room, and the malevolent presence seemed to recoil in agony. The room returned to its normal state, and the spectral images of the tormented family faded away. The investigators were left breathless and shaken, but they had succeeded in breaking the mansion's hold on Clara, the haunted doll. As they left the mansion that night, they knew that the malevolent force that had plagued the town for generations had been weakened. The mansion on Willow Street was no longer a place of unspeakable horrors, but a dark relic of the past, its secrets laid bare for all to see. The town slowly began to heal, and the legend of Clara, the haunted doll, faded into memory. The mansion, once feared and avoided, now stood as a solemn reminder of the darkness that could be found in the most unsuspecting places. And the paranormal investigators had finally uncovered the truth, bringing an end to a centuries-old curse.